we on? Good. Welcome to the Better Than Not podcast. Sometimes we get it right, sometimes we don't. But when we at least do something, we know it's almost always better than not. Hi there, and welcome to Better Than Not, the podcast that aims to capture shifting perspectives and thought-provoking ideas in conversation, based loosely on my series, A Changing Frame of Reference, which you can read on the Substack app, and I hope you will, as it might give you some insight into what this podcast is all about. I'm your host, Doug Gardam, and today I get to welcome back Dan Martins. Dan is an adventurer who had a calling from God. At least that's what we called the last episode that we did, number 58. So Dan, welcome. Yeah. Great to have you back.
Thanks for inviting me back.
With our last conversation, we had gotten a long way along, and it was like, wow, we haven't even gotten back to your, I'll call it maybe Middle East or your adventures in Europe that went kind of further on. So I thought it would be great to kind of start just kind of going back a little bit, because how we finished, and those of you that are listening, how we finished with Dan was you had flown back from, I believe it was the Middle East. Mm-hmm. You had just had this kind of message that you need to go home, I think from a commander.
Right.
And if you want to know more about this, please go back to episode 58, because it's a fascinating story. Anyway, you land in LaGuardia in New York, and you go to this truck stop, and you put a message in, and you find a trucker that did you used to work for them?
No. I for my early years, I had my class 1 truck driving license. I used to drive long haul, and I thought a flight back to Abbotsford back to Vancouver from New York.
Yes, yeah.
I was almost out of money, and I thought, well, why don't I just go to a truck stop? I got a bus to a truck stop from the airport and just put a note there saying truck driver wanting to get to Vancouver and will help with the driving. And so it was, I think, 3 truckers got me right to my front door. From New York, I think we went through Colorado into Montana somewhere, and then from Montana to Langley. And then from Langley, another trucker that I knew dropped me at my doorstep. So I got my meals covered.
And you did some of the driving on this too?
Yeah. I did most of the driving, like across the USA. Yeah. So we did
worked out really good.
A sleeper team. So the guy was driving. He got paid for the mileage, and he was sleeping in the bunk at times, and I was driving. And
wow. So that's kind of where we ended off.
Okay.
And then you kind of said, well, we haven't even gotten into like my life in that. And so I thought you were kind enough to say, like, I'll come back. And so rather than doing this remotely, we get to do this like having a coffee, which is kind of cool, I think.
Yeah. And the coffee's good, by the way. Thanks.
You're welcome. So let me try and kind of understand here. Like you come back home. You've been gone for a year?
I think about 8 months on that trip.
Something like that. Mm-hmm. And I think your family and friends here are pretty glad to see you come back. Mm-hmm. And you didn't stay for very long. How did things start to take off then? Because you're like, when you kind of start, I think when you start traveling, it's kind of hard to stop. Mm-hmm. No? The bug gets in you?
Yeah, I think so.
So what happened?
I think I've had a bit of a wanderlust like that. So when I got back, I had no money. So, of course, I had to go to work. So I worked, I forget what I did, and saved up money. During that time, I'm thinking, I got to see more of the world. And so I did. I went, I was going to backpack Southeast Asia. And so I did. I got a flight. I started in the Philippines. I was in the Philippines about 4 months, did some things there. And then
why the Philippines? What made you you're here kind of in BC, and you've worked for a bit. Mm-hmm. You're already I'm going somewhere else.
Yeah.
And what made
Philippines is about as far east as you can go, so I was going to work my way back. And then there was a ministry there that I wanted to check out. So I did some volunteer things with them and saw what they were doing. And that was a big part of my call to kind of live globally as a follower of Christ outside the box where I grew up, and thinking, okay, how is that fitting if I would live kingdom values in another culture, maybe where they had never heard of the Gospels,
right.
the Bible, how to walk in faith in Jesus Christ and that. So that's a good place to start. Let's see what they're doing over there. So I spent some time with them and traveled the Philippines a little bit. And then I went to Hong Kong. And in Hong Kong, remember, this is pre-internet. So information wasn't out there. No. And the prime source of information as a backpacker in those days were the youth hostels. And cheap rooms. And you get these travelers, backpackers coming from all over the world. And that's where you spend a few days talking to guys from and girls from all over the world. And you're gleaning this information. Oh, I'd like to go there. If I go there, I should do that and stuff. So while I was in Hong Kong, and so what really struck me about Asia is the amount of people, like Hong Kong, Philippines, massive amounts of people. And so at that time, I was having a conversation with the Lord. You know, my walk with God was, a few years old now, and I told you I'd done some journaling.
And nothing's wavering at this point. Like, this is like solidly in your heart. Like,
it is, but I had a big question. When I hit Asia, the big question is, so there's so many people over here, and they've never heard the gospel. So then I'm starting to think, so is my faith true just because I want it to be true, just because I believe it's true? Have I been indoctrinated? I kind of grew up in a Christian family, took me to church and all of that. So, and then I came to my personal faith. But so I'm rethinking, but is this just in my mind? So I'm seeing millions of people here, maybe never heard the gospel. What's true for them? Is Jesus Christ true? Is it inclusive or exclusive? Is it true even if people haven't never heard the gospel? So I'm praying and watching and thinking all of this through. And I'm in Hong Kong. It's a busy city, lots of people, this hostel. And the word comes out of the hostel. Literally that day, China just opened up for independent travelers. It used to be, the Communist Party. You had to be part of a tour group on a bus, and you were monitored. They showed you what they wanted you to see, all control. And now it just opened up to independent travelers.
So what, like timing-wise, Dan, where is this? Like, are we
this is mid-'80s.
Mid-'80s.
I'm thinking maybe 82 at this point, something like that. And so I went the next day to the embassy there, and I got a visa into China as an independent traveler.
Just like that.
Just like that. And then I took a boat into Guangzhou, and then I just started making my way through China, and got a bus ticket going here, and what China was by far, hands down, the most difficult country I've ever traveled in those days. No one spoke English, almost no English, and people everywhere. And so I traveled by bus, riverboat, train, into these places. I couldn't even tell you where I went. I couldn't retrack my steps.
It's funny you say that, because I can remember being in Shanghai. I was in there in business. This is years, like when I say years ago, this is post 2000. And it was like, when you're in Europe, you can kind of make the signs out, like you can figure out. But to your point, I had no clue. Like, there's no it's written in the Mandarin or whatever the language symbolically. I couldn't have told anybody where I was. Like, phone a taxi. Well, I can't phone a taxi because I don't know where I am.
Yeah.
So you like, that's what you mean by the most difficult.
And this was way before. I've been back to China since, and it's a different country. I was speaking of Shanghai, on my way, I went into Shanghai at 9 o'clock in the evening, downtown Shanghai. I was walking, the streets were completely empty. There was no nightlife. There was only the street sweepers. Like they had these water tank trucks with hoses.
Yeah.
People used to spit a lot. And so they would be washing with brushes, washing the sidewalks.
Oh, okay.
Those were the only people out there.
Really?
And this was like 9, 10 o'clock in the evening. Yeah. I mean, it was difficult to find a place to sleep. I would go to, because they had a lot of buses. Well, the bus parking lots, they didn't lock the door on the bus. I would sleep in the back seat of a bus. You know, it's like a bed.
Really?
I would just sleep there. And the doors were open. There was nobody sleeping in buses. So you just didn't meet foreigners or anything.
So no concern about your safety?
No. I think it was really a safe country. I had no issues there. But I was a lot in the rural areas and stuff. And the reason I talk about China, I'm in China, seeing hundreds of thousands over my weeks there, would have seen millions of people. And this question, Lord, these poor people have never heard of Christ. And I've got the truth and they don't. Like, Lord, what's your plan with these people? And so I've got these questions.
So would you ask people this question? Like
in China?
Yeah, like
I couldn't talk to anybody.
When I see. Yes,
when I would get a train ticket, I would go to a train station, massive. How do you buy a ticket? Nobody speaks English. I would walk up and down the rows. They'd have queues, 10, 15 queues. People. 10, 15 queues, thousands of people. And I would walk up and down, and then I would wait. And someone one guy walked up to me and said, "Excuse me, would you speak English to me?" So he had never spoken perhaps to an English speaker, but he learned English from a book or so. But I stood out as a foreigner because I never saw any other foreigners. And so if somebody knew English and had the courage to come up and speak to me, this guy was a minefield, or not a minefield, a gold field of information. So I would start in a conversation and say, "I need a ticket going to here. Could you buy a ticket? Help me." So he would help. And then I would get information about where I wanted to go, where I should go, because he spoke some English.
Wow.
And so
you have no idea it's like this when you decided I'm going to go into China?
No, I just wanted to see it. I didn't know what was going to come. I didn't know how difficult. But I mean, that was a challenge. I loved it. And so, we won't even talk about the non-existence of toilets and
oh my goodness,
like that. It was quite incredible. And the food. I mean, I would just go into a place where they were serving food. The only thing I could do was walk into the kitchen and look at under the pots where they were cooking and point, yes, some of this, some of this. Yeah, nobody spoke English like that. And I was an oddity, of course.
Oh, yeah, you must have stuck out.
So when I was in that context, I'm walking down, I don't know what city it was, big town, small city, walking down, and I hear these words, come in for tea, in English. I said, "Oh, where is that?" And so there was down some steps in this little kind of a tea shop, and this guy's calling me in. So I went in and thought, wow, this is great. I can speak some English. This guy probably spoke the best English that I had heard. So he served me tea, and we're in a conversation.
He could speak English.
Yeah, relatively well. And I said, "So how did you learn English?" And he said, "Yeah, I was studying to be a doctor in university. And so I was learning English there. And then I said some things about the government, maybe I shouldn't have said, and that." And so, see, in those days, if you were educated and you didn't follow the ideology of the government, you were a threat.
This is prior to Tenement Square.
Yeah, prior to early 80s. And so it got back to some sources. And so he was put to work in this tea shop. This is his new future, washing dishes in this little tea shop. And he's educated.
As a doctor.
And he was 2,000 miles away from his parents. And this is his new life. And so
no one kind of questioned, like, you are this foreigner, this person that's obviously not fitting in with the rest, is like, why are they here? No one would
No, they couldn't talk to me. They would look at me, and
Okay.
I would look at them.
Wow.
There was no communication. Like, I mean, I could tell you lots of stories of things that happened there. But what was interesting with this guy, so I'm gonna leave. He gave me a lot of good information, and then I asked him, "Have you ever heard of Jesus Christ?" And his face just lit up. He said, "Yes, I am. I am." I said, "What do you mean?" He says, "I believe." And I said, "How did you hear?" And he said, "Yes, Australian couple came." And so the story was an Australian couple came on one of these tours. And they had, I think they had got some Bibles in Chinese. And so they took them into the country with them, and they would leave them, these New Testaments. And so they had met this guy. They had shared the gospel with him, gave him a New Testament, took him to where they were staying, baptized him in their bathtub, in their room, and left him
on his own.
On his own. And I said, does anyone know you're a Christian? And he says, no, too dangerous. I'm afraid they will, if the government finds out, they will punish my parents. So he had never spoken to anyone about Jesus Christ other than this couple. So he had the New Testament, and it was indwelt with the Holy Spirit. Nothing else. So remember, the conversation I'm having with God, have I just been indoctrinated into what I believe is the truth? This guy was, quote unquote, pure Christian, no indoctrination. And then I'm asking, and he starts telling me how his life was changing and things that he was experiencing. The same things that I was experiencing or had experienced in my walk with Christ. Yeah. And then, so I had my Bible with him. He had never heard of the Old Testament. So I read some from the Old Testament, Lamentations, from Psalms about David.
Yes.
And just as he's reading it, I'm reading it. He says, "That's me. That's me." So he can connect with David, King David from the Old Testament, because of the only connection he had was the Spirit of God. And with me, my connection with him was his life was being transformed as mine was. And we were brothers. Wow. And it was so moving for me. For me, this answered the question of, am I indoctrinated into the truth? No, it's real because it's the truth. And so
just to get an idea, so you've been in China for how long at this point?
At this time, maybe a couple weeks.
And you've really had no conversation other than the train station with the guy that kind of tried to talk to you.
Getting a ticket or
you've had no connection with people in a communication other than hand signals and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And then this guy with tea.
Yeah. Invited me in. So, I mean, this is a God thing, right? And this put to rest that conversation I had with God. Yeah. And so I said, "Brother, I will meet you in heaven, and I'll pray for you." It was so good to meet you. I left. I gave him a little bit of money. I didn't have much, but gave him a little bit. I said, "We'll meet again in heaven." Remember, I would have loved to take if I would have known internet was coming down the road, but I had no concept I could ever meet him again. That was it just never even entered my mind. And so I walked away from it. I was in tears when I walked away. I'm sure I encouraged him. It was a powerful experience for him, but for me, much more so. It went to the core of my faith.
It's multiple levels, actually, right? Because it's like you've met a kindred spirit. Yeah. Like it's another human that you've kind of been connected with, right? Too. Like, my goodness.
It instilled in me, there's nothing I can do that's more important. It impacted his eternity and the hope he has in life. Like, he's hopeless working at washing dishes in this tea shop.
Yes.
What kind of a future is it? But he's got an eternal hope, that God is going to right all of the injustices for eternity. And so for me, it was like, what's more important in life than seeing this, to see him have hope? And so I thought, I want to live my life in a way that I have contact, especially with people who have never heard about the redemptive story of Jesus Christ. And so that was kind of a big kingpin in my future life too. Kind of adventure, meeting people in areas that they don't have access to the gospel. Because there was no internet. You couldn't go online and get information.
So you've come. I'm trying. Like, to me, this is like how you kind of go, like almost like an archaeologist when they're digging.
An untrained goofball.
You're digging in the dirt, and like you're looking for something, but you don't know what that is. And I mean, it's not equivalent. It's just kind of like it. And then, so you've been in the Philippines for a number of weeks. Then you go.
I think it was some months.
You were there in the Philippines. Then you went up to Hong Kong, and then so you haven't really had in touch with people that you knew, so to speak. You're finding people because you went alone, right?
I did know people or get to know people in the Philippines at a deeper level. Believers that were involved in ministry and that was quite powerful too. But
and as you go along this to Hong Kong, then you find out here, like you didn't go over with the intention of going to China, I don't think, from what you understood.
No.
So when you get this information from wherever, it comes out and says, so, well, now you can go into China. You go in there, you spent a couple of weeks, and then it's like you found this diamond that is like spectacular, right? Like, because it's touched your soul.
It was a divine appointment. You know, when I look back at that was quite life-changing for me.
Oh, I can't.
And how do you meet that guy? It was really, I had this question in my mind, and God just said, oh, I've got a guy, I've got one of my sons in China that you got to meet him. And this Chinese fella, he said, hey, I want to introduce you to this guy from Canada to encourage you in your faith, you know? And so, yeah.
So now you got this, right? You've got a new kind of zest for what's going on. Where do you go? Like, because you had to leave this guy. And was he concerned at all that he might be found out after you left him, or is he knew what to do? Like he was doing what he needed to do?
Yeah, he went back to what he was doing, and I lost touch with him. You know, in those days, you couldn't write letters. You know, I just never even thought about it. You know, it was like being on another planet. And I'm not thinking of coming back to this planet. There's no communication with that planet, you know, and it was so foreign. I just never thought that in my world that I would ever be able to communicate on my phone or WhatsApp or something.
When you think though, Dan, I mean, in the early 80s, we had no idea what was coming. Like it's not, like you could hear little things, right? But like that we were going to be able to send emails to anyone in the world, right? This whole internet thing was like almost, there was nothing. Like it was geeks at school. I was probably one of them. That had taken like cards or whatever and done a little bit of stuff that they'd done in high school. So when you're going through this, to me, what's so kind of interesting of where that is gonna go, like, and you have no way of doing that connection, right? Like you just what I was gonna say, sorry. I remember, so this is going back, this is going to be in the 2008 time zone. And I was gone a couple of weeks, and I'd flown from Germany to Shanghai. So this is like my first time in another world. I fly into Shanghai airport, which is massive, to say the least. And Sunday afternoon, and fortunately someone's there with a sign to pick me up. Because I have no idea. And we start driving. There's these massive highways. So again, 2008. So you're 30 years before that time. And that's what I mean by the cultural shift. There's no one on these highways. Like we're driving. I'm going like, oh, this is so weird. Then you see the train that you heard about, this supersonic train that zooms by.
Those weren't there yet, but
and then I started to take a few pictures of these massive skyscrapers that were out in nowhere. And I'm going, oh, this is kind of cool. Well, after I'd taken like 20 pictures, they didn't stop. And they were like out in nowhere. And it was like, to your point about being like on Mars or in another planet, that's how I felt. This is 30 years after you've already kind of tread through here. So it's like, I get what you, and then I heard that like Shanghai goes and changes its population by almost 10 million during the day from people come in to people leaving to go back home again. And that was like taking it from something like 20 million to 30 million, which is the population of Canada. Like it was unbelievable numbers to me. Like I didn't really believe them. They had this circular in Shanghai ramp that was too high. That was like, you could see the other side, but it was multiple football fields.
Yeah.
Just massive.
Yeah.
And I'm kind of, so when you say you're kind of out of this world, and you're planted there with no, like I had the corporation behind me. You're alone.
Yeah.
No, you're not alone. No, you're with God.
God with me, yeah. You know, Doug, our world is just changed with technology. It's changed exponentially like that. So you put that together. There was not that much technology back then, and then you put that together with a communist government where there's no opposition. So here in our democratic world, you know, one party wants to do this, and there's a lot of pushback, opposition. It's change comes so slowly. So in China, I mean, it's just the top leaders say, yeah, we're going to build a city there. It's done. They just build it.
They knock whatever's there down and build another one.
So there's no resistance. There's no opposition. So the advantage is you can make incredible strides very quickly.
Sure. Yes.
The downside is if they make the wrong decisions, they fall off a cliff. You know, so so we've seen that kind of what's the word I'm looking for? The growth, in a sense, has been way faster in technology, let's say. So they came from it was like pre-World War I, it seemed, to I mean, there was no cars. You know, only the Communist Party leaders had cars. So
really?
The streets were empty of cars. There was buses and bicycles and some trucks working on the field and trucks taking soldiers and that. But there wasn't, people didn't have cars. You couldn't own cars.
So like in 30 years, that shifted.
All changed,
It's amazing.
There was no wealth in the private hands. It was all in the officials' hands. So it was.
So now you've gone through this guy. He's very excited by what he knows about the New Testament and Jesus, and you say goodbye. Where to now? Yeah, then you got now a lift to your step probably.
Yeah, so I worked my way down through other countries in Southeast Asia.
Where were you? Where was that in China?
I don't know.
Oh, that's right.
I don't even know what town it was. You know, I remember coming down the Yangtze River on a boat. Yeah, sleeping on the boat, and not in a room. They were like kind of raised wood platforms with wood siding, like coffins, kind of like this. And you had your slotted space, and you slept in there. I had my little. I didn't have a backpack. I had a day bag, kind of, that I traveled with. Maybe 10. It wasn't 10 kilos,
right?
You know, and so that's where you slept, and you were just sleeping like that. And
oh wow!
I remember seeing a dentist out in a rural town. You know, like your mother's old Singer sewing machine with a foot pedal, like that.
Yes.
Well, he had a chair out on the sidewalk, and he had the foot pedal like this with the cords, and that was on his drill. He was drilling the teeth of a guy sitting in the chair, and with his foot pumping
in open air.
In open air, yeah. I don't know if he had any freezing or not, but that was the age.
And this is early 80s.
And that was kind of more of a rural setting. So I just was wandering, bus tickets and boats on the rivers.
No fear for your safety.
No fear. I never felt endangered. No, I felt totally safe. So I make my way through Southeast Asia, get to Sri Lanka, and then I think I thought, okay, it's time to go home. I flew from Sri Lanka to Europe and then home. And no, I went to Israel at that time. I knew some people in Israel. So I spent some time hitchhiking around Israel. That was
now, didn't
impressive.
we get to Israel on
the
last conversation?
Yes.
Right?
So this is my second time in Israel. And go back to Canada. And then I thought, you know, if I'm going to live overseas and really give my life to sharing my faith, I got to know a little bit more theologically in that. So I went to Bible school.
Oh, you did?
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
okay.
Prairie Bible Institute. And then, so while I'm there, I'm thinking, you know, I would really love to live among Muslims from my prior trip in the Middle East. So I thought, I think God's calling me to the Muslim world to just live among Muslims. And, but I didn't know where. And so I was reading in this book, it's called Operation World. And I came across a country, and this book, it tells you what's happening in the world, in the Christian world, in every country of the world. So I'm reading in there, and it talks about this little country, Maldives. I'd never heard of Maldives.
Yes.
You know, because, well, again, there's no information here.
There's only two reasons I know
There's
Maldives.
the encyclopedia. That's it.
It was a vacation spot for some of the guys at work. Nice vacation spot. And I think very, very good diving.
Right. Yeah.
That's all I know.
Yeah. And you've only known that because of the last few years.
Oh, no question.
I didn't know that because tourism hadn't really got its root. It was just starting to come in those days. And so I read about this country, Maldives, and it listed 4 points about Maldives. There's no known believers there. Missionaries had never been there. Ever. There's no scripture in their language. Their language is called Divihi, and they use a ton of script, only spoken and written there. And at that time, there was only 250,000 people there. And then the 4th point was, it's 100% Muslim. And it was like...
I found my spot.
It was like, Lord, now I know where to go. I think, what more interesting place could there be where there are no believers and they've never heard of Jesus Christ and they're Muslims? I felt drawn to Muslims. I really had this inner love for Muslims who had never heard about Christ. So I thought, okay, I'll make a survey trip. So I went.
So you're still here, right? You're finishing Bible school.
Yeah.
And you're coming up with, like, what did some of your peers say, or even some of the professors? Like, Dan, hey, what are you doing?
That sounds like a good idea.
Oh, they were pro for you.
Everybody, my parents always encouraged me in whatever I wanted to do.
Really?
So yeah, and I had a bit of money.
So you never had any you're out of your mind.
Yeah.
You didn't
I had been to Sri Lanka before, so I flew into Sri Lanka, and then I took a boat from Sri Lanka into Maldives. So Maldives from Sri Lanka is about 800 kilometers out into the Indian Ocean.
Wow.
Towards Africa.
Yeah.
And there's these 1,200 little islands. Like we're talking, most islands are the size of a shopping mall. You walk around in 5-10 minutes. About 220 islands are inhabited, and then they've got some resort islands, which I hadn't really thought about the resorts, but each resort has its own island and that. And then most of the islands are uninhabited. And the islands, they're in the Indian Ocean. There's east of or west of India, Sri Lanka, is what they call a Laccadive Plateau. So in the Indian Ocean, it's 2,000-3,000 meters deep, 2 or 3 kilometers deep. There's this Laccadive Peninsula that comes up to about 50 or 60 meters of the surface. And then from that, these coral islands grow. There's these atolls. Now, the word atoll is the only Divihi word. It's a Maldivian word that the English language has adopted into English language. And Maldivians rightly are quite proud of that, right?
Really?
And so there's these atolls, these rings of islands, and then these islands just poke through these rings, and then the islands poke through on these rings, and there's channels between. And so there's no mainland. So when you're on an island, all you see is water, and at a distance you'll see a little island there. And the islands stop growing. They're atoll. They're coral formations. They stop growing at about 2 meters, 1.5, 2 meters out of the water. So there's no mountains. There's no running water. There's no streams. There's palm trees and white sand. I mean, the sand is the color of the Kleenex.
Really?
Yeah.
Like snow.
They're picture perfect. And so the tourists that go there, they see that side of it. But, there's another side on the local island. So I went, it's a story in itself I got to the island in the boat.
So you went from Sri Lanka to
Yeah.
the Maldives.
I wanted to see, I thought they got to have ships going to Maldives. I know they have
Okay.
a small airport. You know, they're landing some heavy planes. They're flying tourists
Okay.
there. But, you know, that was relatively new. And I thought, what better way to go than on a ship? So I thought, so I went to this agency. Do you have a ship going to Maldives, like a passenger ship? Oh no. We have some cargo boats that are going, cargo ships that are going. I forget the word he used exactly, but he said, yeah. I said, could I get past? Yeah, it's at $35. Come back next Tuesday, and you can go on the boat.
That's how you did it.
So I went back there, and so I went in Colombo into the harbor, got my passport stamped by immigration. So we're walking down there, and between these ships, these cargo steel-hulled ships, is this wooden boat. It's about 85 feet long, and it's a trading vessel from the Maldives kind of thing. And he introduced me to the first mate, and there was one guy that spoke some English, Hussein, and so I got on there. I paid $35.
So you get off the cargo ship onto this little...
No, I wasn't. I was just in the harbor.
Oh, okay.
And so I got on this boat, and he said, well, there's not a bed for you, but when one of the crew isn't sleeping, you just sleep on his mat, you know, just mat on hardwood and stuff. And so we headed out. There wasn't even gas for cooking. They had firewood stored on the roof to cook, and we were fishing for tuna. They had food and that, but and they had material on there for making T-shirts and like that, going over there a sewing factory in Maldives and that. And what I did know, it was monsoon season, so there was big swells out there, and I was just sicker than a dog.
Just from
and it was raining, and it was gray skies and that. No electronic equipment on here. So this Hussein, he was the first mate. He spoke some English. He had a sextant, and he's trying to get a bearing on the sun. We couldn't see the stars, so we would get the brightest spot in the... I had no idea how dangerous that actually was. So I'm sick. He's charting the course, and we're shooting for these little islands. We miss these islands. We run out of fuel. We're stuck between Maldives and Africa somehow. And I'm thinking, like, oh, I wonder how many of these guys get lost at sea. I have no idea. You know, there was no access to that kind of information. And so we're heading out, and then the engine breaks down. And so, so if you know anything about seafaring, when a vessel is dead in the water, it goes broadside to the wind.
Yeah.
And so the swells are coming in. And now we're like this in the swells. And I was just dry heaving and that. So all that to say, I was thinking, oh, Lord, what am I doing out here? So they take the head off of the engine. They realized the engine rings were damaged in one of the cylinders, but they had no spare parts. So they just put it back together. Thought, okay, we'll just run at slow speed, idling kind of. So we just put towards Maldives. And so one night it's dark, and I hear the crew, they're like, oh, everybody's excited and celebrating that. So I got up, and on the horizon, you could see a shine. Below the horizon, you could see, and that's the capital city, Mali. And so we thought, oh, we made it. We're going to make it. We're going to make it, you know. So I got there, and spent a month there, went to some local islands and that. And so after a month, I overstayed my visa because I couldn't get back to Mali where I could fly out of that. That was a bit of a mess. So I got back, and I remember then saying, oh, Lord, I don't know if I can do Maldives, these islands. Right? I've been truck driving. I like to see stuff go by. I like to travel. There's nothing out there. There's nowhere to go on these islands, you know. And
they're small.
And they're small. Yeah. The best you're going to do is a bicycle. And so I got back, and it was like the Lord really confirmed, challenged me. I would say God didn't tell me to go to Maldives, but just challenged me. Would you go to Maldives? Now, one thing I've got to say about Maldivians, they're probably the most friendly people I've ever met. And they have a good command of English. You know, they speak their local language, and so I said, yeah, okay, I'm going. So I had 3 business plans. How am I going to get a business visa there? or how am I going to get a visa to stay? And I thought, can't get a job. So I got to start some kind of a business. So I had 3 business plans. So I got back to Maldives. I had a one month tourist visa.
So you came back to Canada?
Yeah, I was back in Canada. Developed my business plan, what I would do to get a visa to live in Maldives, to live among Maldivians, and to live there and share my faith.
You're focused.
I'm pretty focused. Yeah.
Oh
and goodness. So I go back. So in that month, I realized all 3 plans are going to fail. Like, dang. And I was just shocked. I thought, Lord, I thought you really wanted me to be here. I thought you were going to open the door. And
this isn't working.
It's not working. And I got no plan B. I was so sure. So what to do? I went back to Sri Lanka. No plan what to do next. So I prayed and fasted for a few days. Just got into the Word, read the Word, prayed. Wow. And I was just convinced, I only know one thing. I got to go back. So, okay. I didn't go by boat. Yeah. I flew in. You know, it's not that far. It's an hour flight. So I flew back into Maldives having no plan. And so I met a guy that I had met the month prior. And he said, hey, have you ever, did I introduce you to my brother-in-law? And I said, no. He said, oh, I think you'd like him. So he took me to his office in Mali. So we chatted for about an hour. And this guy, just cool guy. And he says, so Dan, tell you what, I own 2 tourist resorts. And he says, why don't you go to one resort as my guest, no charge, free room and board, stay as long as you want, and see what job you'd like to do there. And I said,
so the door was open.
He just opened the door for me.
Wow.
And so I went to the resort. That's where I started learning divvy with a crew, with the staff. In those days, there was no women working. It wasn't a woman's place.
Okay.
So all of the staff were Maldivians. They come to the resort, work for 11 months, and then go to their home island. So I was just in with these guys, making friends, and then I went back to the owner, and I said, "Yeah, you know what I could do? I know your water sports center is a mess. Oh, wow. I grew up with water sports, right?
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, and so I could help you there." He said, "Okay, so you're a water sports manager now. So water sports, like the windsurfing, sailing, kayaking, all that, was separate from the diving school. So I had a basic PADI scuba diving license. He says, but I need some credentials. Are you a windsurf instructor? You know, that I got to show immigration. And I said, windsurf instructor? Not yet, but I'll be back. So I had windsurfed for one hour in Philippines. Okay. Didn't know what I was doing. Didn't take a lesson and trying to figure out the wind. And then I had windsurfed in Sri Lanka. So I went back to Sri Lanka, the windsurf school, and I said, "Can you certify me as a windsurf instructor?" Nope, because I'm an instructor, but I can't certify somebody up to my level.
Okay.
But I can teach you to windsurf, and I can teach you to teach others to windsurf. And I said, "Okay, that sounds good. Let's go with that." So I just windsurfed and learned to be, I'm a pretty avid windsurfer, and it was fun, of course. And then, so he said, I'll tell you what I'll do. We went, there was no computer, so we went to a 5-star resort. They have a business center. And so he took his letterhead, sheet of paper, gave it to the secretary. So she typed this out. This is to certify that Daniel John Martin's so-and-so number is certified, is qualified to instruct windsurfing. He wrote it out. It didn't say I was a windsurf instructor. And then he put his seal on it and signed it and all that. And I said, wow, that looks very nice. So I went back to Maldives. And a week later, I had gave it to the owner, and he had his guys go to immigration. I had my visa. And from that, I got into diving. Okay. I became a diving instructor while I was in Maldives. And so I was water sports, diving, and I spent 12 years there. Met my wife there after 7 years. Oh, wow. And I enjoyed that so much. I'll bet. Oh, it was fabulous. You could have made a TV show. So I'm on this resort island working. all with Maldivian guys. They were my buddies. They were my friends. I'm learning more. I'm learning about Islam. I'm sharing Christ. I was quite bold in my faith, although it was illegal.
Right.
It was illegal to talk about Christ with Maldivians. But I mean,
was. Okay.
Oh, yeah. In those days, no religion except Islam was allowed to be practiced. So I was allowed to have my faith. I was allowed to have one Bible, come in with one Bible, not two. You weren't allowed to evangelize or anything. So I had my Bible, and I wasn't with other on the island. There wasn't other believers, so we couldn't. There was no fellowship.
There was no grouping or anything like that.
And so I was just sharing my faith. Later, I met my wife there. My wife's from Switzerland, and she came.
She was there on holiday, probably.
No, she was working. She was a flight attendant for the Swiss charter division. And so she was also a diver. And I was working in a dive school, and she came. So the crew with the Swiss airline, they were out of hours. So the crew would have layovers. There's only 2 flights a week. The Swiss, it's a small country, only 7, 8 million people. So only 2 flights a week. So she would come, and then she'd have to stay in Maldives for 3, 4 days until the next flight. She could work going home.
Okay.
And I had never seen flight attendants come. We would always have a crew there where I was, but I never saw flight attendants come back. She came back 3 times in 6 weeks, and she wasn't a believer. And every time I would just, hey, Doris, you're back. What do you do? Every time I would share my faith, it was pretty clear she was a seeker. She was asking all of these questions. And the last time, her English, she speaks multiple languages, and she had kind of a holiday English. And so I gave her, the only English book I had was Mere Christianity, which is quite theological.
C.S. Lewis.
C.S. Lewis.
Yes.
So I gave her that book, and then next time I saw her, she had, all of these German words. She would go to the dictionary, and what does this word mean? She would write the German. So I knew, wow, she's serious. And so, short story is, I proposed to her. Well, we had been, so my diving contract was up. And so I was going to go back to Canada before I came back, sign a new contract for diving. So I was going to go back to Canada. And it was quite a story. A sailing yacht was going around the world, American sailing yacht. I got on there from Maldives and sailed. I was paid crew, sailed into the Mediterranean. From Maldives across the Indian Ocean, through the Gulf of Aden, Aqaba, the Gulf of Aden, the Red Sea, through the Suez Canal into the Mediterranean. It was 1 month sailing. We were deep sea fishing. It was incredible. Spectacular. And then I had Doris's address. And so I was in Italy. I said, okay, Lord, I would really like to see Doris. I really like her, but she's not a believer. I don't want to be unequally yoked. I want to marry a gal that is in the same. Now, remember, I'm 36 years old at this time. I'm bald. I'm living in a country that's 100% Muslim. What are the chances of me getting married? I thought, probably that's forty. That's not going to happen. And then this girl shows up, and I said, wow, I really like her. So I thought, okay, my role in her life is to be a messenger of the gospel. So I said, okay, Lord, so it became very clear. My role is just to share the good news with her. Right. And now, if she came to faith, then she's class A, marriageable. But I said, I'll test you, Lord. I'll give her one phone call. And so I was in Italy, phoned, it was ringing. She didn't pick up. This other girl picked up. Her name's Ursi. And she didn't really know much English. I knew a bit German.
Oh, okay.
I was working with German divers. I can get managed in German. And she says, oh, no, Doris isn't here. She went to her mother's place. And she gave me her mother's number. Oh, wow. Called her mother. She said, no, Doris isn't here, but she'll be here in a couple hours. And so who's this? And I said, just tell her that Dan the diver from Maldives.
Dan the diver?
Yeah.
There's a book.
Yeah. Literally, you know what my address was in Maldives? I was working on a resort at that time. I worked on multiple. I was working on a resort called Maldives. My mother would mail me letters. 3 words on an envelope would find me. Dan, Maldives, Dan, Bandos, Maldives. So there's only one Maldives. There's only one island, Bandos. There's no addresses, and I'm Dan.
Oh,
and so, so I called, and Doris picked up the second time, and so I spent about 12 days there just sharing the gospel.
So you've just come off this crazy rise sailing through the Suez Canal.
Yeah, on my way home to Canada. Yeah, and met Doris, and so then I told Doris, "Bye, I'm on my way home to Canada." And she had, kind of a long story, but she had just booked 10 weeks leave of absence. You know, she's thinking, what am I going to do with my life? You know, and so she booked an English class in Berkeley, California. She wanted to improve her English. I go home to Vancouver or Abbotsford, and then she sends her phone number. She's boarding in Berkeley. And I call her and say, "Hey, so Doris, how's school going?" "Oh, yeah, really good." I said, "So Doris, what are you going to do about Jesus?" She says, "Oh, yeah, I already decided I'm following Jesus." I said, "Oh, really?" And so like, ding, she's class A. I said, "Doris, can I come down and meet you?"
Oh.
So I went down, met her, brought her up, introduced her to my parents, and asked my parents, "What do you think?" "I think she's the guy. I want to propose to her. What do you think?" They said, "Oh, we love Doris." Proposed to her, it completely broadsided her, and she had a brain freeze or something. She said yes, and then we had spent at that time a total of 40 days together over a period of 6 months.
40 days. Yeah. Wow, significant 40 days.
Yeah. So she went back to Switzerland and she arranged the wedding, and I went over just before the wedding, met her father and mother, and I met her mother before, but in Switzerland. But she arranged the wedding, and we hardly knew each other, so she got basically free flights. So she booked our flights. We traveled around the world for 8 months. That was our honeymoon. We didn't know
8 months.
8 months. We didn't know anyone else, just us. And that's where we really got to be good friends. Yeah. And then after that, we settled. We lived together in Switzerland about a year and a half. And that's where, not that I fully understand her, but that's where I came to understand, like, oh yeah, it's not just Doris thing. Like, the Swiss are super, super clean, right?
Okay.
And I think, like, is she trying to annoy me? Not that I'm that dirty, but just her level. But then I realized, oh no, that's a Swiss thing. And just the mentality, the Swiss. And I realized it's not just her. That's the way her family is. Yeah. It's a cultural thing. So once I was immersed in that culture, it really helped me understand better who she is. That was a very valuable time. And then we went to Maldives.
And she already knew that you were already set with where you were going.
Yeah, I just kind of made that very clear to her. For me, I just have this kind of deep desire, challenge, calling, if you want to say, to Maldives. I love Maldivians, and I want to live among Maldivians. I want them to know, like, who Christ is, and just the hope that's there, and that. So we went to Maldives. She was then her actual training is in hotel management, so that's what she had been doing in Switzerland.
She didn't miss the flight?
She did, in a sense, because it's a 5-star life, living in 5-star hotels. So she was working as a hotel assistant manager of a hotel in Switzerland.
Oh, okay.
A lot of responsibility. It's a 24/7. You're working with staff, and so flying for 7 years was just like a paid vacation for her. And then when we went to Maldives, she had this responsibility they thought, oh, if you can manage a hotel, you can manage a medical clinic. But she didn't know medicine, so it was very, very stressful. We had 4 doctors, number of nurses, lab technician, pharmacy, all that. And she was managing that and managing visas. Our doctors were foreigners. There was local staff and Maldivian staff. And I mean, it was really, really stressful. And she would come home from work. Sometimes her hand would just be shaking like that. And I was working diving.
Right.
And so I was working, she was working. And then she got pregnant with our first, Luke. And so we went back to Switzerland, had the birth, came back. And then our second son, we were going to go to India for the birth, but he was 7 weeks premature, so we had the birth in Maldives.
Oh.
And in those days, he was born in '97, and I mean the medical field condition is much better now. But in those days, it was pretty tenuous. At a 7-week premature, we didn't know if he was gonna. He's a miracle baby in a sense. That's another story.
That's cool.
And yeah, and we just loved our relationships with Maldivians there. It was stressful in a way, but in another way, it was really enjoyable too. And
wow, that's crazy. So you in that world, you learned a lot about another religion too.
Yeah, and
you were raising kids in that environment as well, right?
Yeah, young kids.
Wow.
Yeah. Our oldest son would go to like kindergarten thing with his uniform on with a little tie and white shirt, and it was kind of cute. And
so did they learn to dive early?
No, we were gone by that time. Well, what happened is I mentioned that. So in Mali, there are other expats and other religions. Even though no other religion is allowed to be practiced, we had a group of expatriates that were living and working there, and a number were believers. So we would meet quietly, kind of, and so we would meet together, and which we knew that was illegal. And short stories, I don't want to say too much about our friends that are there, and that there are some security things going on till this day. But then, long story short is we were deported from there in 1998. Because no other faith is allowed to be practiced. And of course, we were practicing, and we were sharing our faith and that. So, we had to leave in '98, and our boys, and so we left. We had, I think, 2 suitcases and 3 boxes. Left everything else behind, and it was like on short notice. So some of the expatriates had to leave within 24 hours. Our youngest son Micah had a high fever, and we didn't know when the police were going to come pick us up and take us to the airport.
You just knew that it was happening.
We knew it was happening, and so one day, I think it was on the 3rd day, and we were taken in and interrogated, and who have you been talking to about Jesus Christ? And I said, really? Yeah. I said, whoa. Of course, we're not going to give names, but I said, I've been here for 12 years. So many people I can't even start to remember. But I have so many interesting conversations about Islam, and I love to learn about Islam and how Islam is practiced, and all my friends are Muslim. So we share, and I mean, if they want to really get to know me, they're gonna soon know that God is central to who I am.
Yes.
And so that's just who I am. Yeah. And if they don't like that, that's fine. We'll talk about something else. If they like it, well, let's talk about that.
Right.
But in all of that, we're just discussing our faiths, how we live our faiths, and like that. And so we left there, and I remember saying to Doris, like my diving equipment, I couldn't take. We didn't have that much luggage. So I had to sell everything within hours, and at that point we were a family of 4, and the single most expensive item we had as a family was my diving computer, $250. We had nothing left, and
wow,
yeah. So we've always traveled light, and it's a lifestyle.
In a way, we don't really need a lot.
No.
Like you would understand that in a complete way, but we do kind of in this Western world, kind of comfortable with our things, so to speak, right? There's
a certain freedom in living, and Doris and I have had households, like after that we moved to Malaysia. We've been the last 20 years living in Malaysia. So you do acquire things, but it's good just to downgrade, simplify life, and
well, we found that out in multiple moves we've done since being in Ontario, and it's like how do we get all this stuff?
Yeah,
that's the thing that's
accumulates, doesn't it? Yeah,
like it's just like I was noticing, like even with the mail, right? It's like how does like we get all this stuff, and it's like you think you're throwing stuff out, but then there's a whole bunch of it again, right?
Just boomerangs, right?
I'm kind of blown away, like often by it, because a friend of ours has this thing. He says, whatever, if something comes in, something else has to go out.
Yeah.
And I said, so how's that going? He says, not very well.
Yeah.
Right. But it's kind of
true. We're just overcome with advertising telling us we need all this stuff.
Yeah. No, there's no question about that. So you spent 20 years in Malaysia. So that's a whole nother...
Yeah, that's another story. So we came back to Canada, settled a little bit, and then we went to Malaysia, and there I started a water sports company.
Oh, similar.
Similar. So really fun. We had an anchor brand of like the leading beach catamaran sailboats in the world, and so we were a supplier of water sports equipment like sailboats, kayaks, windsurfing equipment, stand-up paddle boards are popular now, and most of our customers were like 4- and 5-star beach resorts, and so we provide all their water sports equipment, train their staff, after sales service, spare parts, all of that.
So that worked out pretty good.
Yeah, it was, so we were very intentional. We moved to Malaysia, and we thought, hey, if we're living in Malaysia, let's learn the local language. So the first year we dedicated to learning language. And at that time, I had time to build relationships in the local community and just research companies. What kind of companies could we start?
Right.
I have my father was an he's still alive.
Oh, so it's in your blood.
It's kind of in the blood.
Okay.
And so I saw my dad do that kind of thing, and so it's that balance. I'm an entrepreneur. I'm a risk taker.
Right.
My wife Doris is exactly the other way. Her dad was a Swiss banker. Swiss bankers take no risk. They want to see collateral. They're not risk takers. So she grew up in that. Yep. And so we came to a balance. She would keep my feet on the ground. Because I would lose everything. It's a good balance. Some I would take some stupid risk and lose everything. And she just challenged me on that. So I researched 7 different companies that I could, like in diving, maybe a liveaboard, and all kinds of different types of things. And then we came up with a water sports supply company, and it was profitable enough that we could afford to make lots of mistakes. So, so we decided on that. And
so do the water. Did you still do diving?
Yeah, but just on a recreational basis, not as a business.
Oh, okay.
But there's good diving in Malaysia. So not like Maldives. I mean, it wasn't Maldives is spectacular. Yeah. I mean, I've got probably 4,000 dives in Maldives. And when you do like thousands of dives, like about 4,000, you run into dives that are so out of this world class. That is spectacular.
And when you say
not every dive, of course,
is that wrecks? Is that wildlife in the water?
Everything. Yeah. The best diving you can do in Maldives, I went from resort diving to in Mali, but the best diving you'll do is on a liveaboard. A liveaboard is a livable, so your whole diving vacation is on a purpose-built diving boat. It's a luxury yacht made for diving, and so you've got all the luxuries of the yacht, and then you have a tender. So we had like a 48 in Maldives. The Maldivian guy I was working for, his business. Luxury yacht with a 48-foot tender. So all the diving equipment is on the tender, the diving compressors, all the diving equipment, because the big yachts with the currents and the channels, it's too dangerous to get them close to the reef to pick up your divers. So the tender, you do your diving off the tender, it comes back to the mother vessel, and that's where the food is and like that. And then in the meantime, you go to the next step. We were doing 4 dives a day. So you need your surface interval of about 2 hours, 45 minutes. After, or maximum 3 hours, you need to be in the water again to get your 4 dives. The 4th dive then will be a night dive. And so, so the tender goes ahead so you don't hear the compressors. And so you're living on the water. And at that time in Maldives, the tourist resorts had to be in the tourist zone. So all the land-based resorts, each resort would have maybe a repertoire of 30 dive sites, but they always, after breakfast, they had to be back for lunch. so their range was not extended.
Okay.
We could get out of the tourist resort, and we were diving pristine sites that only liveaboards can get to. So a liveaboard diving vacation is the best of the best, and that's where you really see the good stuff, because no other divers, or very few, and you get to know where these places are. And yeah, just spectacular. So lots of sharks. I remember one tour I did. So we do 9 or 10 days, and usually 35, 36 dives. And I remember there was only one dive where we didn't see sharks, and we would have, but sometimes the current is so strong that we'd have to take an alternate site. So I mean, everything was manta rays, just all the big stuff.
Everything.
Yeah, everything. Yeah, I mean, not every dive is spectacular, especially when I was working as an instructor and training people. You know, you have they got to learn the water skills in the lagoon and that, but
then you get out to the real stuff. So like this whole sense of like not being concerned about your safety, that just follows you around, right? So like it's like when you're like diving and you're seeing this incredible wildlife, like sharks and manta rays and whatever, like was it like out of this world? Like it
was really, really good. I've got certain dives that are just unforgettable. It's like the best of the best. But the most dangerous, it was more fearing for the safety of other divers.
Because you're in charge of the group, right?
Yeah. And sometimes as an instructor, you make a bad call. You misjudge the current. If it was really, I'm not sure, I would go in and check, get in the water and actually check. But sometimes you make bad calls, you know, and I realized, oh, this is going to be bad. This is really bad. And sometimes you tell the whole group we're going up. And you have to watch your novice divers. So when you're on a boat, we'd have maybe 20 divers. I have a local dive master. Maldivians are unbelievable divers.
Really?
They're seamen.
Because they grew up in it.
They grew up on the sea. In the early days, they might not have had their educational background, even to be certified. We had guys that were working that weren't certified, but they just know, they couldn't understand the physiology and the physics behind what's happening, and to do the dive tables and stuff to pass the examinations. But they knew what to do and what not to do, and how to care for other divers. You couldn't touch them. Yeah. Oh, they were so good.
Really?
So good. Now that's all changed because their educational system, there are a lot of really, really good, the best instructors on Maldivians.
Wow.
And the biggest danger in those days was instructors coming to Maldives and working only a season. Because Maldives was, it's known for its vast range of fish, the species, so range, and the massive number of fish, and the coral life in that too. But and strong current. The best dives are in really strong current. It's just a principle. The stronger the current, the more fish. But you do drift dives. It's not like you're not going against the current. So you'll drop the divers and then you flow with the current. Yeah. And then you see the fish life. You stop along the way, and then the diving boat will pick you up. You know, you do your safety stops along the way, and then they pick you up there. So yeah, really, really good diving. But in all of that mix, and then you're training others to dive, and that you do. I was going to say, so the biggest threat is the strong currents and diving instructors that come that don't have the experience of the currents, and they make bad calls because they don't know. They haven't been there long enough. Right. But after you're there for some years, you learn that, and so it's the accidents that do happen in Maldives from my experience, are more due to current than the bends or something like that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and in those days there was only one decompression chamber. It was at Club Med in those early days, a small 2-man chamber and that.
And that's usually caused by coming up too quick.
Yeah, multiple reasons. Yeah.
Oh, is it?
Yeah, it's a rapid ascent, which is the most dangerous. Air embolism, lung overexpansion injury, where you would hold your breath and come to the surface because of the pressure. Your lungs will overexpand, and the air escapes your lungs, goes directly into your blood system, and it blocks.
Oh, is that what happens?
Yeah, it could kill you in 5 minutes. But the paralyzation, that's the bends. And then there's the other thing, narcosis. That's where at depth you will the pressure of the nitrogen. It's like being intoxicated underwater. You just can't think straight. But that will add a depth, and when you ascend, it just goes away. There are no side effects, and you learn how to manage that a bit. That usually only comes on at 35, usually about 40 meters. But 40 meters is considered a deep dive.
That's pretty.
Under scuba. Scuba is self-contained underwater breathing apparatus.
Yes.
The sport recreational diving is 30 meters. And then to go 40, then you take a
special
deep dive
certification.
Yeah. But in Maldives, and you fudge that sometimes too. But for really good dive sites sometimes. Yeah. But no, we try to follow the law. And I mean, there was shark feeding going on in that time, and the government put an end to that because
is that to attract them to see them?
Yeah, there was some really crazy stuff going on in those early days. In the early days, until there was injuries and that the government stopped it. Not that everyone stopped it, but there was still some going on, and exciting, to see some of that. But for me, the most, and in those early days, there was no nitrox or mixed gases. There's no commercial diving equipment going on. So when there was some commercial diving jobs, some things that had to be done, who's going to do it? So you do it on scuba. And so, I mean, really, I was involved in one incident was really, really, really dangerous.
Really?
And, young, and there was a helicopter crash. There was 4 helicopters in the country at that time, used for tourism. Flying people out.
Okay.
And one of them crashed, and it was 16 people. It was 16-man helicopter. Yeah. There was 9 passengers and the 2 pilots, and it crashed, and it sank, and all 9. The pilots got out, but all 9 tourists died.
Okay.
And it was at 54 meters, and a big twin engine, of course, and it was upside down at 54 meters. So we salvaged that on scuba at 54 meters.
So you're stretched the 30-meter one.
Oh yeah, we did. We shouldn't have done that, and I won't even explain what that was like. But we exceeded the limits by a long shot, and we did salvage it, got it to the surface.
The helicopter.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Wow.
So ship. So, but we had to connect all the cables. Ship came in when we were ready, and we connected it, lifted it up, and then the ship was pulling a barge, and then set it down on a barge. It's another story, but really, really. It was a miracle we survived.
Really?
That. Yeah, that's all I'll say about that. And during that time, my wife was pregnant with our first son.
Oh,
and
wow.
I really thought I was going to die. I was underwater, and I was to the point of blacking out and thinking, oh, Lord.
The pressure is like that.
Oh, Lord. And I didn't even tell my wife about that until years later.
Oh, really?
And then, it's just...
things we
just
do.
My own stupidity, that just pushing the limits.
Yeah.
That's one thing that sometimes instruction. When you do a lot of diving, you think the rules. You get used to it,
Absolutely.
and you push it and stuff. But yeah.
Well, it's funny because we went
you're young and stupid at times.
Years ago. We went on this holiday with friends, and they down to Nassau, and they went diving on this expedition. And when one of the guys came up, he couldn't, like you said about being intoxicated, he just couldn't function. And the leader knew it right away, and he spent most of the holiday in one of these compression chamber things. Yeah. And I think they called it the bends.
Yeah, the bends, yeah.
But they still didn't know what went on.
Yeah.
That was the thing that, it wasn't like it was an obvious, I went up too quick. When he got on board, I wasn't with them. I've been one of those guys that would love to be dive. Now that I know someone so connected with it, man, that might be something a neat experience to do. But that was like a real that they saw a hammerhead that dive, and they were saying that when he came up, like he couldn't write his name, and he headed right to. They took him right to the pressure jetters, or the pressure. What do they call it? The pressure
decompression
chamber. Yeah.
And then you need a hyperbaric doctor that drives the chamber, that controls it. Yeah, I've been in once or twice. Once for sure, but not for myself, but accompanying one of our divers that had to go in. Just breaking the rules.
Yeah, just go.
It was just, we have a site in Maldives that we know of where there would be, if we go early morning, there was a school of hammerheads that would come in. Yeah, just like spectacular, and you have to have a liveaboard to get there. So there's those kind of
things that you get to see.
Yeah, I remember at one resort, there was a couple of divers. So we had, we have a lot of European divers that are very good divers, but we'd have unlimited dive. We sold an unlimited dive package.
Wow.
It's land-based at a resort. These are the full tanks. So you take a tank whenever you want, basically, and not in the middle of the night, of course. Full tank, and you put your empty tanks here. And we look, when you come, you check their logbooks. Okay, this guy's got hundreds of. We've seen people show up 1,000 dives plus. So they're good divers. They know what they're doing. Yeah. And so this unlimited, it's the cheapest way to dive, of course. And then so one guy at dinner, and we're way out in a resort, way out in the atolls, and he says, "Yeah, I'm just really getting pain and stuff." And I go, "Oh." So I phoned the hyperbaric doctor. So the first thing you do is get the guy's computer. And so let me see your profile, because the computer logs your diving profiles. So you go back and you see and you're just like, what have you done?
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh,
and
wow.
On the resort, there's a wall dive. It's deep. And so he's, me, mate. And so he was going down deep and said, "Oh, I forgot my camera." And from depth, coming up to the lagoon, going to his room, getting his camera, going back at depth, and there was some current, and then he sees fish up at a lesser depth. So he's up. So it was like a jigsaw. Like I said, like, you know better than that, and he said, "Yeah, I know." And
but it was okay.
Yeah, and so I phoned the hyperbaric doctor, and I said, like, this is his state, and said, "Okay, put him on this and that, and call me back in an hour. If it's getting worse, you need to come in." At night. And so an hour later, he said, "Yeah, no, it's actually getting worse."
Oh.
You got to get here. And he says, bring his diving buddy. The worst thing you can do is find a way to get here. He gets here, and his diving buddy's back at the resort, and he feels the band's coming on too. So I got to monitor him. And that. Oh. So how do we get there? It cost, in those days, this was in about 1990 or so. The only, like I said, was at Club Med. It was $3,000 to get a boat at night to take him there, and that was in the early 90s.
And that was the only way to go.
It was the only way. So I would go. I went into the chamber with him because he was so tired. It was the middle of the night by the time you go there, and so what happens? The chamber's so small. What can happen is if he would have claustrophobia or something, he could, the doctor put him on some Valium or something just to relax him. Yeah. But he was so tired. I remember sometimes you're on pure oxygen on a mask. This is an old chamber. And so I would have to just on the regulator, just watch his lungs. He was so tired he could hardly breathe. And just and make sure the air got to him. But I wasn't with him the whole time. And then from the chamber, there's another chamber on the side. So you can open that door, go into the little chamber, close the door, and then he can bring you up, decrease your pressure, and bring you to the surface like that. Wow. Once he was stabilized in that. But and you don't go in once. Usually you go in, depending on your profile, what type of bends it is. You'll maybe go 6 sessions like that. So you're in there for hours each session. And in those days, it was $600 US per hour. And so multiple hours. So yeah, it was an expensive mistake to make. Oh, but it's better than being paralyzed, right?
Oh, for sure. No, there's no question about that. Mm. But I think of when you describe the hammerheads as an example, right? Like seeing that, must be
seeing one is something, but a school of them, yeah.
Because there's this account on Instagram, Ocean Ramsey. You may have heard of her, and she's a lady that goes into these like the shots of her with great big gigantic great whites.
Oh
and
yeah,
swimming alongside them.
Wow, yeah.
And she talks about the safety around sharks, right? Because everyone's like, as soon as you see a shark, get away, right? And they're quite concerned about wildlife and protection and that type of thing. But seeing these shots, Dan.
Yeah. Oh, like, white sharks are in a completely different league. You know, the reef sharks. So in Maldives, we're, you know, they do have ocean-going sharks that are very dangerous. You know, certain species are, but they're not usually coming inside the atolls. They're ocean-going.
Oh, okay.
And there's nothing to see out there except those sharks. But in around the reef, it's mostly reef sharks that really
don't bother you at all.
You don't do stupid stuff. You brief your divers what to do. A lot of them have videos and cameras and stuff. But just don't get out of line. The shark feeding, the sharks get into a bit of a frenzy there. And that's full on crazy. That's really exciting.
When you say sharks feeding, like what is sharks feeding? Like you mentioned that earlier on. Like they feed the sharks to attract them?
Yeah, and not in a cage. You're chumming kind of thing. And in those days, there was a German guy, Voigtman. He was the first. And so it's just like take kind of a small garbage can with dead fish in it. And you go down and along the reef. You don't have to go deep like gray sharks.
You're in the water.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, you're at about 15 meters. No need to go deep. The sharks will smell it. They'll come up. And in those days, so the feeder is there, and then behind them would be the scout, and he's there, and so the feeder would take a fish out of the garbage can with a lid, take it out, and the sharks will come. And it's best if there's a current, so the sharks will always come
from
one direction, so you can see it, but you don't know what's coming from behind. So the spotter is looking up and behind. Where's the feeder? And then, so if one shark is coming, the feeder would go, whoa, take this fish away. And he, at that point, won't come back for it, go by. And then the second one, whoa, take, and then you give it to the third, let's say. So initially, they know you're there. They can smell you. They can hear the bubbles. So they will come up. And so then, as it happens more, then the next fish, then the sharks get into a bit, they want, so the circles will get tighter and more sharks will come until some point it's too dangerous for the shark feeder even to put his hand into the bucket. So at that, because the sharks, and that time the sharks are coming like this. I mean, they're the banging guys on the head.
I've never heard of this.
Oh, yeah. That's the way they did. Now, you know, there's shark cages. But in those days, nobody had invented the shark cages yet. And so at one point, he may just dump the fish. And then it's just, they're
crazy.
Almost cannibalizing each other, you know. But, yeah. I mean, I've seen guys with cameras and sharks coming in, banging the sharks on the head and just like, whoa. So in that particular time, the biggest dangers actually is when divers might, so if divers would panic and shoot to the surface, that is a bigger danger than actually being bit by a shark. Because the sharks don't really want you. You got neoprene suits on, or at least a shorty.
Right.
You know, you got the hoses and the tanks. You're not very attractive to a shark.
Interesting, eh?
Yeah, they've got lots of fish and that, but just
wow.
Yeah.
Well, I didn't expect that story today. Like that's crazy as far as.
So I mean, there were certain people that that did get hurt, and like this guy who originated Voigtman.
Yeah.
He's legendary in a way. So he would at one point then put the fish in his mouth by the tail, and the sharks would come the sharks would take it, but he got hit from the side. A shark skin, if you've ever felt, it's like really rough sandpaper, and it caught his face here and that. So the government rightly made it illegal, so that kind of shut that down.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so they don't do it anymore. But that was happening in the 80s, late 80s, early 90s, maybe. Yeah.
What we'll do, eh?
Yeah.
What as humans, how ingenious we'll get to get the things that we're trying to
once
get.
It was known he was German, it was quite famous. So people would come there just to see this with him. So they would pay.
They would go down with him.
Yeah, big money because for camera getting shots, and I think video was invented at that time. Yeah, he was quite well known. And then others would copy that and that a bit. So,
Really?
yeah, it's a bit of an adrenaline thing.
Yeah, I'm sure it would be, yes.
And for those that were watching, that really not that dangerous, I would say. But for the feeder, it would have been, yeah.
So, bringing us back here, your calling has brought you to some very interesting places. Like,
yeah, it's been an adventure, you know, and we were never lacking anything. And I think even when we went to Malaysia, you know, raising our boys, we raised them in a Malaysian culture where we were. They were the only in our town. They were the only two white kids there. They came in when we went to Malaysia. They were 11 and 8 years old, and you know, they learned the language there. Didn't go to just kicking a football with the kids. They were learning it faster. We were focused on it. Yeah. They were learning it faster than we were.
It's weird.
And then we did a combination of homeschooling, online schooling. They went to local schools. Local school was really good for their language and cultural learning. And, you know, the system there is a bit different. We realized the longer they're in a local school, the more catch up they'd probably have to do. Because we knew that they would probably, you know, they'd want to go to university in the West and that. But it was really challenging. They had, for all of us, it was a challenge. We had struggles, but wouldn't trade it for anything. Just our friends there. The hospitality of Maldivians too, but Malaysians is, you just can't be in the West. We just can't touch it. We don't get it. We can't touch it. Especially, you know, if you like their food and if you learn their language, oh man, they would invite us to all of their functions, weddings, all of the feasts and the Islamic holidays and stuff. They're just introduced us to their extended families. We had an incredible life there. We're going to go back, of course, for holidays, and my wife and I will probably go back every year for an extended time. And Malaysia is a beautiful country. It's so inexpensive to live there. The people are nice, and of course, we don't hide our faith either. You know, and yeah.
Well, it's almost like that's a grounding for the whole thing, right? Mm-hmm. This is part of the adventure of a life.
It is,
which you've had. Like I didn't know about the diving part. Like it's just because I have numerous friends that love diving. Mm-hmm. Like Cozumel, we went once, and I've done very little. But the time I was in Cozumel, right, literally trained on the boat. Yeah. And you kind of went down, and it was like the current. You mentioned the current, and it was like it takes you away.
Yeah.
Like,
so you did kind of a resort course, like 3 dives. It's not certified, but it's just a.
And it was just like you could listen and learn and kind of quick. And I was just one of the things that I had wanted to experience a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
And
the weightlessness and that, you know, the buoyancy control.
What was so weird about Cozumel was it like being in a pool. Mm-hmm. Like the water was like, as you described the Maldives, it's like, how is this an ocean? Like it was amazing. Yeah. But it was the currents that I was like kind of astounded by. Mm-hmm. Was like just how they can move you and almost in a scary way. Yeah. Like I can't grab onto anything to hold me here kind of thing. And but that was my experience in doing it. Yeah. And
once the more time you spend in it and have you learn to use the current to your advantage.
Right.
So you don't have to use your muscle. Because your muscle is your body tissue that needs the most oxygen. So the harder you work, the more air you're using. So if you learn to use the current and just flow with it, you're using less air and that. But there again, diving impacted my faith. Because as I was in there and got into the diving and you enter this whole nother world. And they say something like 2/3 or 3/4 of the life of the planet is underwater. Now, here I am in Maldives, and no one saw it. In all of history, millennia, no one saw any of this. It was we're only able to see it now that we've got scuba. Before you had a diving mask, how many centuries went by? Nobody knew the fish life down there. Right. So you've got all of this incredible fish life, the colors, and all of this was invented in the mind of God. And when you spend enough time there, you start to see the symbiotic relationships between fish, how they protect themselves, how they hunt, how they do this, and you see some of the characteristics of these fish. Like when a tuna strikes, tuna, they can swim at something like, what is it, 80 kilometers per hour?
I don't know.
And they can sustain speeds. They've had them in tunnels of like 30 or 40 kilometers per hour. As long as they have, like they swim with their mouth open because they have oxygen bladders.
Oh.
And so when they strike, as they swim, they're loading up their oxygen bladder. And when a tuna strikes, it's like supernatural. When you're in the water, you see millions of fish, but you don't see fish swim at that speed because of the resistance. Water is so dense.
Yeah.
As a diver, you feel it. The resistance. And then when you see a tuna strike, it's just like, boom, the fish is gone. And it doesn't wave its tail. It vibrates.
The whole fish does.
Dude, the tail's moving so fast you can hardly see it. And there's like a popping sound, like a hollow kind of a...
Really?
Like, boom, it's gone until it's got its fish. And then it has to load up its oxygen. And you just gain an immense respect for the underwater, the fish life. But what it does is it's quiet. Nobody can talk to you.
Yes.
And you're there. I have had some of my best prayer times underwater, talking to God, and just I'm so impressed with the Creator. Whose idea was it to invent? It was his. He had never seen anything like it. It came out of his mind.
Oh yeah.
And he's the Creator God, and all of this was happening before we ever saw him. This was going on for millennia. We never even saw it. When you see schools of manta, and they're like, it's like they'll put, there's feeding stations and they will come in and it's almost like a show. These things will do backflips and stuff. They'll breach, they'll out of the water and land on their back.
I've seen videos of that.
Yeah, and they're like this, and then this one coming, and when you come down, they're kind of got a blind spot. It's like an aircraft carrier. They're just so incredibly good. Then you enter their world, and you get to live there for 45 minutes, an hour, and you see all that kind of stuff. We actually weren't meant to see that. We were, because we invented scuba, but all of this would happen whether we invented scuba gear or not. And
we had nothing to do with it.
Yeah, it's just a statement. This is just this is the glory of God manifest in one aspect. How about, and then you got the micro, and then the macro. We're talking about going to Mars.
Yes, yeah.
This has all come from the mind of God.
It is stunning, because when you say that, it's given me like a whole other picture that I'd not thought about. Because you said something like 2/3 is underwater. At least,
yeah.
Of what's there, right? Mm-hmm. And it's always been there. Mm-hmm. Like it was created.
A Maldivian friend just sent me an article 2 days ago. They've just discovered a new fish they've never seen before in Maldives. And it lives at, I think, 1,500 meters, so 1.5. It's this long. It's in the perch family. It's, 4 inches long. Oh, wow. Never been found before. And how many others are out there that haven't been seen yet? So still discovering.
Well, you said 1,500 meters?
Yeah, 1.5 kilometers underwater.
The pressure.
Yeah,
that's there, right? It's almost hard to believe that that was the sense of it. But you kind of bring, like, often water is seen as chaos, right? From the mythological world, and even in ancient writing, a lot of water was chaos because we don't know what's down there, right? And our mind makes monsters, kind of like, and our movies have brought us those monsters too, right? And it's like you've experienced like this, like few probably others have, right? How many? 4,000 dives is what you said?
Yeah. I quit logging them after about 700. So what's the point? And then, but I've just, like, the years and the dives per day and done math that way. So I would estimate about 4,000. But there is a wild side and a chaos side. Like in a storm, when you're at sea and there's no main, I have immense respect for the ocean. And the other side is, I think living in Maldives 12 years and just living kind of on the sea because there's no every day you're just looking at ocean all the time. It clears my mind. And to this day, when if we go to Vancouver and I see the ocean, it just, my whole spirit is just like,
really?
It just clears my mind. The expanse of it. You kind of see forever, or there's nothing in the horizon that stops. There's no mountain or tree. It's the sea. It's eternal kind of. And it's massive, and there's a monster down there in a sense, but there's a beauty to it too. You learn to work with it, and I've done quite a bit of sailing as well in the last years in Malaysia.
So you learn a lot.
Sailing out to islands and stuff. And just so you see the wild side, the storms in waves, and you think, oh Lord, what have I done now? What have I got myself into? And you come out, and so I have a high respect for the ocean, but the beauty of it too. And it's being a big part of my life, that when I see the ocean, it's different than a lake. I like the lake and that, but when I see the ocean, it's just like there are no limits here. Like even a sailboat on the lake, you've got limits. There's boundaries.
Yes.
The ocean, there's no boundary. You can circumvent the ocean and keep going, right? So.
I mean, I can't help when the way you talk about it, I think of Thor Heyerdahl and the Kon-Tiki adventure, right? Like,
right.
And it's just like he kind of expressed that in like they were kind of out of their mind trying to demonstrate historically. I
remember that, yeah.
And like what they did on that raft, and it just went with currents. Like it's kind of like, to me, in many ways, your story.
Huge experiment it was, right?
Yeah. And then they proved that it was. And it's kind of like when I hear these things, it's like, wow, to be out there, like to do it. Do you get the itch to dive a lot?
Not so much now. I've also had an accident, so my left diaphragm is partially paralyzed, so I can't get my full breath. I'm at maybe 70%. That's I can still snow ski, but a lot of the sports, I can't.
Just respiratory wise.
It's respiratory wise, but
from diving?
No, I had a really bad. It was actually pulling one of my sailboats up, and it was an accident. I just slammed the ground so hard. It was one of the stupid things I did, and it was some neurological. And it's up in my neck, like this. It's the nerve. It's a nerve thing, and so that's. But life is still good. Look at what I can do. Yeah.
Well, just the fact that you have this stuff to remember and to know that you went through it, right?
Yeah. So you don't focus on what you can't do. You focus on what you can do.
Oh yeah.
And I still like to ride motorcycle. Even at my age. All you need is your wrist. Yeah. I mean, I have to be careful. My response time is different and that, but yeah, I still like a little bit of adrenaline, and my wife and I like to travel. And
that's cool. That is very cool.
And living in Malaysia, my wife and I always thought, and I also always thought too. Are we, is it a disadvantage to our boys? They don't have all the good stuff their friends have here. They're in a kind of the first 12 years we're in quite a rural setting, and they don't have this, they don't have that, and that, but they did learn other things, and the language and the culture, they made friends there and that. But it was really, both of them have went to UBC, and have graduated from there and went on in life. And I remember the email, our oldest son, after a year at UBC, in his first year. And he says, Mom and Dad, thank you for raising me in Malaysia.
Oh my goodness, man.
He says, I struggled, and I know you struggled with stuff, but it's through those struggles, it's made me the man I am today. And so cool. He would have reason to be bitter, like, why I didn't get to do this and that. But he's really, you could drop both of the boys, anywhere in the world. And they're so flexible, I mean, maybe they struggle a bit at times with their identity, because they weren't living in their passport countries. They're Swiss and Canadian.
Right.
They haven't lived in each of the countries, but they know their parents are from there. They know they don't actually belong in Maldives or Malaysia because they look different, but inside they feel Asian. So who am I actually? And they've worked through that, and
But they would have skills that others just couldn't even
Yeah,
like
I think so.
imagine even, right?
And they've really found their identity, their
Yes.
identities in Christ. And so we're just excited
That
about
is so
that,
cool.
and see that our oldest son is working and living in London, him and his wife, and
England?
London, England. Yeah, he was
Wow.
at London School of Economics, did his master's there. And
Oh, wow.
he's got his dream job working for a consultant company. So he's in London for now, but who knows where he'll be.
So you had told me when we first met that one of your sons had met a person that knew C.S. Lewis.
Yeah.
Because you mentioned Mere Christianity.
Yeah, that's our younger son. Yeah.
And so explain a little more about that. Like you said that he was helping the man and found out that he knew C.S. Lewis.
Yeah. Well, he's got a friend and he helps care for him. And I think he's about 87 years old or so. And so his friend, this 87-year-old man, his friend knew C.S. Lewis. So my son sometimes takes the man he cares for is in a wheelchair, takes him to visit his. I won't use their names.
Right. Yeah.
Takes him to visit then because they're both old. This other man is older than he is.
He would have to be.
I believe he's 100, around 100 years old. And so my son is in on their conversation and says, "Oh yeah," and C.S. Lewis did this. And I remember then when he, had personal contact with them, and that's what it was. For my son, that's kind of like, wow.
Well, I think of like the story you just said about giving your wife Mere Christianity, right? And her writing the German words.
Yeah.
And like that's, I'm sure that's known in your family.
Yeah.
And it's like, because that's not, like, I read it later. That's not an easy book to read.
Yeah.
By any stretch.
That's right.
Like I find C.S. Lewis actually sometimes a challenge because he put like, Screw Tape Letter has become my favorite book.
Oh yeah.
Or one of my favorite.
Yeah.
Because it's a fooling kind of book, right? Like he gets you agreeing with things only to find out that it's the demon.
From the demon's perspective.
And you're kind of going, like, oh, that sounds quite right. But maybe, well, that's because it's written from the demon perspective.
Yeah.
And it's kind of neat that I just threw that out because it's like, you exemplify, I think, living in the present. And the reason why I bring that up is because...
Yeah, my wife's the planner. I'm a planner. So she's balanced me out since
then. This is why we find who we find for our
That's
mates.
Right, yeah.
But he had said that, and I've repeated this, because I find it almost profound, but we live in three... And this is from the demon telling this to his intern perspective. Screw Tape's telling it to his intern. But he says humans... Or in this case, it's his Christian that he's been assigned to convert, so to speak. He says, like to live in three times. And they have the past, which is part of where we want it, because people live there, want to change what they did, but it can't be changed. It's all done. And the future is where they worry, because we really want them in the worried state all the time.
We want them to live there, for sure.
But where... the enemy, which is God, this is the thing you got to keep bouncing back and forth and says, we want them in the present because that's as close as they get in this world to eternity.
Oh, yeah.
And I kind of go, and as I listen to you, I'm kind of going, you do that, you don't even necessarily know it because it's like you're like I said, you never concerned about your safety. Like, you're going to be taken care of. Like it's one of those things. Look at where it's taken you. Like it's, to me, it's just. And we hadn't even talked about your diving before. Probably just talk about your diving with all the different stories you have in it alone, right? Sailing, even like how you described going on the boat the first time from Sri Lanka to the Maldives. And I was thinking of like, the disciples when they're on the stormy sea and God comes there, Jesus comes to them across the water, walking on the water and asking Paul, ye of such little faith. Yeah. And I'm thinking, oh my goodness, there's the stories even telling the story.
Yeah. You know what is interesting? My wife and I were back in we're technically not allowed to go back to Maldives, but we've been back 4 times.
Okay.
And so I told my wife and my boys this story about going on the boat from Sri Lanka. So last time we were in Maldives, I met that first mate. I met him.
No way.
Yes. So my wife is like, Dan, it's true. I can show you. I'll show you later. I'll show you pictures. I'll show you pictures of that sextant. I'll show you pictures of the logbook of it and pictures of the boat I'm talking about. Yeah.
So what's that, like 30 years
That
after?
was, I think that was in 1985 when I first went. It was 84 or 85.
So that's 30 plus years, right?
Yeah, that's 15, 40. Yeah. 15 and 15 and 25. That's 40 years ago. And I met him. He's well known in Maldives.
Really?
Yeah. He went on to be he got his master's certification, and he's worked on cargo ships that have went world in the merchant trade. Yeah. But that was his start. And then he did his license, and
I just kept going progressing.
90,000, I think he said 90,000 ton ships or something.
Wow.
Yeah, he's been all over the world. But I met him, and just it was a beautiful reunion. He remembered me and like that. So
wouldn't you like to meet the guy who you met in China?
Oh yeah,
at the tea shop.
Yeah. How that would ever come about? That would have to be a God thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
That would have to be a God thing.
No, I would tend to agree with that.
Yeah,
too. It's crazy.
So
amazing. Well, Dan, I don't know how to thank you for what a story to talk about, and how you've kind of come to where you are today, right? Like we talked about this the last time, but that word retirement doesn't seem to like make any sense at all in many ways, right?
Yeah, people kind of retire, but you never retire from the kingdom.
No,
God's always got stuff for you to do.
Yeah,
right? Yeah.
And what's next, kind of almost for you, is what I kind of think. Like, will you dive again?
It says, man plans his way and God directs his steps. So you kind of make plans, and you just look, okay, where's God directing me to now? I'll dive again, but only tropical.
Yeah.
In cold water here, it's just too painful. You need heavy wetsuits or dry suits. Then that means you need a lot of weight to keep it down. And then the water's cold, and it's just it's an equipment orientated sport. So you need to have the equipment. Whereas in the tropics, it's lightweight. It's different. This is different. Yeah.
You're so technically oriented on this.
I'm really not. No. Since I've come out of it, nitrox has come. So they can stay longer and deeper. They got the whole tech dive industry now, where it's a whole different levels of diving that weren't even there when I was diving. I just had scuba.
I even see the free divers.
Free diving, that's popular now.
It's become like increasingly free, and like it's just the depths that they see, like, and to what your point about the bends and things like that, how like on the edge they would have to be in order to make achieve these feats. Yeah. But I was going to say, it's like we'll probably have another chat.
Let's see what happens.
But I was going to say, when you go back, when you look at, so when you started and you get this calling, when you kind of look at all the things that have gone, how's it going? From that calling, and when you think about all the things that you've gone through and done, how does it feel? Like, how does that, like?
Yeah, it's not often that I get to talk about it like we have in long. So it's usually a thought here, thought there, and I have reminders, but I don't talk all through it.
Yeah.
So when I talk through it now, it's really been a pleasure. I've really enjoyed it. And I just, God's presence has been there through all of that. And, I made a lot of mistakes, a lot of things I would have done different, just like, because in all of this, you'll learn.
Oh, yeah.
If you think you know it all, and I know there's things I believe now that I will learn in the future. Oh, no, I want to be smarter or more in tune with God's will 5 years down there, or interpreting Scripture. I want to change. I want to change because I know there's things that are holding me back, and so that's what life is about, right?
Well, this is why I call it changing frame of reference, because that's what we're trying. Like, and when we can share the experience with what we've learned and what we don't learn, like often I hear God's plan. And I don't really like the word, because I think plan is us. We plan, but it never goes how we kind of want it. It's almost like God's design, because he's not experimenting. He knows. And it's going to come. This is the way. If we can actually learn anything from it, we've gained in our plan. But it's his design. Like he doesn't make mistakes.
Right.
And I think when you start to understand that deeply and keep understanding, like I can't believe like almost the energy that it takes to kind of like more. I can't get enough. Whether it's reading, whether it's chatting, learning new things. Like you just gave, you don't know this, but when you just opened up, when you said that statement about 2/3 of the world's wildlife,
2/3 or 3/4, I forget.
Oh, I'm going to go and look it up. But
of life,
I hadn't like even thought of that yet. And it's like when you go into like the subatomic level, and we can't. This is why I think we're going to have a really difficult time creating like AI, robotic, sentient, because we can't create even an atom. We don't know. Like I think we have a hard time with infinity and cosmos. Well, if you go now, I remember sitting on a bench on the beach. It was after dinner with my wife. We were younger. And I had this thought, I said, like, what's contained in that ocean there is in our minds. Like, the capacity that's there, it's almost the same kind of, like, everything that's there that's how big our mind could be, right? And it's like, you've kind of expressed that in what you've talked about.
Yeah, and it's so little. It's a drop in the ocean, what we know.
Literally.
You know, what comes to mind is there's a saying by John Stott. I can't remember it exactly, but it's something where I think in his last sermon that he ever gave, and he's a known theologian in our time, and he said,
Christ and the Cross.
I think so. And he said, you know, at the end of my life, what I have discovered, the meaning of life is just to become more Christ-like. That's what we're all about. Because we take nothing with us. The only thing is our relationship with God, and He's just preparing us to be more Christ-like as we go into eternity. That's all we've got. You know, we can't take anything else with us.
No.
Who are we in relation to God? And so, yeah, at the end of his life, that's what it's about. To be like Romans 8:28-29 is to be conformed to the image of Christ. And God is working all things towards that. So, yeah, I think just coming on board with that, you know, and okay, well, what do you have today?
When you said you carried he had the New Testament, the T-man, right? And I think the New Testament is a big part of exactly that spirit part, right? It takes us from the flesh and blood of the Old Testament, the material part that we're trying to figure out, and it says into this. I kind of, science-wise, I kind of phrase it as the unconscious, right? Because it's that spot that's so much even bigger that we know so little about. Like, I think it's quite amazing, and it's almost like the ocean gives us another view of it. And you've spent so much time.
It's just a small glimpse of God, just one aspect, the omniscience of God. His creating is just, even the ocean, our planet is just a small part of who He is. And to think that Creator God, that God entered history, came incarnate in Jesus Christ because He wanted to get closer to us. He's moving our way, getting closer to us, and in that revelation, and it's being preserved. And so, okay, so what's my role? How do we get close to you, God? You came close to us, and you made it possible with the redemptive story that we can actually be in eternity with you. Even in eternity, we probably can't get to know God completely. So, it is. What an invitation we have, right?
That's why, to me, it's one of those things that's just open now that it just seems to be unending. And I find in this conversation, this podcast conversation, this format enables us to see that even further individually. Like we get a chance in a conversation that we have, and we don't know what it's going to be, right? Like I had no idea I was going to get this part of your diving, the the guy that feeds the shark feeding, right?
Yeah. Where does that
Where
come?
does it come? And you kind of have these images that come to mind as you're like the ocean and the storm that you go through, and then saying what you said about like how much of our life is actually underwater that we didn't even really know about 100 years ago.
Yeah.
Like, other than it was there.
Yeah.
It's
And we have this. God has given us. It's different than the animals. Given us this. We were divine. We were created in His image.
Yes.
So we have that creative spirit. So we could see what's there, and then watch what's happening, and then use technology to make something like that. To make something like a bird that we can actually fly. Make something like a fish. Okay, we don't have gills, but what can we do to get down there?
Absolutely.
You know, other animals maybe don't have, and so we have that creative spirit in us.
I think that's the part of the God's image. Like I often will talk about the fish's attitude, the airplane. Like we figured out how to fly, but when you look at the eagle or you look at the bird and how crow, like how effortless they get up and fly, and then you look at what we put together to get us into the air. We haven't done it very efficiently, right? Like we compared to like the lightness that it just takes, the grace. It's just unbelievable.
And it's intuitive in a bird.
Oh,
you know, an eagle just jumps out of the nest and it can fly intuitively. They don't know the theory of flight.
No, nothing.
We have to study the theory of flight and that, but we can do it, you know, and we can learn from what God's given us. Do the calculations. You're an engineer, and engineers can in all of these different departments. And we got IT, we got AI to help us, but it's all comes out of the mind of God. If God wasn't there, we couldn't do any of this.
We wouldn't be here. Well, this is why I think it's Hugh Ross that has talked about it, and he had talked about why the universe is the way it is, and his theory is that the universe was created for us. And he has some pretty interesting, pretty compelling stories behind it. When you think about it, like it is kind of amazing that it is. Yeah. And often I'll see, like, if I go out to like the highway, like driving to Vancouver, and like you drove out of here today, it's like it amazes me what we've got to in the sense that most of the cars we drive, one person drives them. We weigh 150 to 200 pounds, whatever that is, and we have this confidence that's 2,000 and more that we put together to get us around. Is that the best we could do? Like, it seems odd to me. Like, it's just like
we're on the way to something better. Right?
This is what I think. Like, when I look at AI, I'm looking at we've opened the internet's opened up our world. Like you were saying, like in the early '80s, we didn't know that. Like I'm always blown away still by the fact that even when I was in high school, no, even later than that we were going to have all the songs that we had ever been recorded, access to them in this little device that fits in our pocket.
Spectacular.
That we pay what we used to pay for one CD or a record. Like, how is that possible? Like, it's just like if that's possible, what more are we going to come up with? Right.
And you know, it's, having said that, Scripture also says the heart of man is desperately wicked. Who can know it? So with all of this technology, there's a dark side to us.
There's always a dark side.
And it shows us how volatile we could blow this whole thing up, you know, because there's some bad guys out there. And we have some of that badness in our own hearts, and that needs to be checked. And if it's not checked, but you know, it just shows you how volatile the end could come anytime, kind of, you know. I mean, look at the coronavirus. Suddenly, the whole world it came out of nowhere, and within months, suddenly we can't travel, we can't do anything. What's next? Especially with AI coming into the horizon and that. So, but we can't live in fear, and we know that God's sovereign. And hey, we're enjoying it.
This is why
we're enjoying it. We don't have to worry.
Your story is so intriguing from that standpoint, because I repeated several times to you. You always felt safe.
Yeah.
Like you were never like, and in our world today, I think it can be very troubling to, like, what is it? Frodo says in Lord of the Rings, it's pretty scary to walk out that front door. And when you mentioned the pandemic, right? that got us inside. Technology keeps us inside, right? Because we think, we can experience, and it's like you're a like almost like a poster child, like a flag of saying, no, get out and see what's out there. And when have you been to the pyramids?
Pyramids? No, got close, coming through the Suez Canal.
Yes.
And just didn't have time to get off and do that. But, you know, and then we were raising a family.
Yeah,
now my wife and I can travel a bit more, and we're planning.
Is that one of the things on the list?
It's not on my list, but it might be one day.
It's one of the things on my list now.
Oh,
like,
okay.
I just, because I've been so fascinated by it, because it's the only wonder in the world.
And how did they do it, right?
Like, there's not a compelling answer to that question still. Because I think it has something to do that's beyond our mechanical part. It's material, but I think there was something that we had a touch with, because we couldn't build it today. Like even clothes.
And they didn't have the equipment.
And it's been there for 4,500 years. Like, it's amazing.
Some big unanswered questions.
And it's again, I think that there's parts that are enabling us to go like step farther. Some of them are going to be dead ends for sure, on where it is. But I come back to how your story, like what you kind of got to experience. Like you got a part of it, like when you even talk about the 4,000 dies, what you saw in those 4,000 dies must be just astounding. Like
not all of them, of course. Some of them are just
absolutely.
like, oh, when is this going to be over? But you know, they're when you see
the hammerheads, you said seeing like how many people have actually been able to see that, right?
And that was that was just part of the dive.
Yes.
Then there's other stuff to see and
amazing to me.
Yeah, God's just got such. This planet is so incredibly beautiful, and you know when you see pictures of it in space, they call it the blue marble. There's not another planet like it that we've discovered. Maybe there are that we haven't discovered yet, but I also wouldn't be surprised if God made this universe, like you say, just for us. Well, you know, God made these fish happen just for Him, and then one day scuba came and I'll let you in on that, but no, it's just actually for me. It's just this is what I can do.
It really makes me, like we might have talked earlier on, like about even trying to get out of this world, right? I don't think there's anything written in the Bible, in most ancient texts, about us having to leave the planet.
Yeah.
We're supposed to be a multi-planet species. Well, I think that's just somebody that's thought this up. I don't think there's any evidence that that's a necessary thing to become. And each one of those, to me, just lends itself to something that's quite different when you go and you look at, I mean, if we go to the 60s, Carl Sagan said something to the effect that life needed only a star and a planet a certain distance from that star. So two things for life. That's like 60 years ago, right? Not very long ago. And how incorrect that was, because now that tables more than 200 different things for life to be created, which we don't know how it actually gets created. And you think how quickly we went to the cosmos to find life elsewhere. SETI and things like that were set up. Never found life.
No, they've never found life.
We've never found life anywhere else. Like it's kind of astounding. And they're
looking for elements that could support life, but never actually found it yet.
No, and to me, all those things. That's kind of brings me back to the Bible and Scripture. There's so much in that still that I don't know that we figured out completely. So it's kind of a neat thing. And your journey combines those in many different ways to me.
Yeah. And it's just nice being in a community. We're all different. We all come from all different walks of life. And, you know, you told me about your story, about being an author and some of that stuff. Like, wow, look at that. We're so different in a way, and we learn from each other in community. You know?
Well, I think the pandemic was one of the things that really demonstrated that to me, was just how I knew in the corporate world, you're kind of constantly in meetings. Like that's just part of the thing. And you kind of take it for granted being with other people. When you leave that, you start to, and I don't think even now we really understand how important we are to one another.
Yeah.
Like just that connection.
Yeah,
I don't think I think maybe that's even part of the reason like the podcast has been such a big important because people like to listen into others talking, right? We need that. Whether it's direct, I think the best way, that's why I wanted to move to these in-person chats, because there's a difference between looking at each other over a coffee versus looking at each other on a screen, right?
Yeah.
And there's something else that goes on that's almost inexplicable in many ways.
A screen is still two-dimensional.
It is.
And we communicate so much by body language.
Oh.
It's three-dimensional. When I see your face three-dimensional, it just adds so much. It's
so hard to
so much better, right?
Oh yeah, no, it's definitely great.
Yeah.
I suppose we probably should bring this to a close.
Hey, it's been good, Doug.
It's been great. I thank you again for making your way out here today, being part of Better Than Not. I thank you for joining us today. I hope you'll join again. There's lots more to come and many, many discussions. And like I said, this is Better Than Not.
Yeah.
Bye for now. Are we on? Good. Welcome to the Better Than Not podcast. Sometimes we get it right, sometimes we don't. But when we at least do something, we know it's almost always better than not.